Hi everybody, this is Flavia and I'm glad you're here. In today's video, we will create two slimline cards for Halloween that have an interactive element. Let me show you one of the cards so you can understand what we will be creating today. This card has a lot of dimension, and when you take it out of the envelope, you can see that one of the pumpkin is hanging from a branch, and we can play with it by shaking the card or swinging it side to side. To make these cards, we are going to start by creating the background panels using this Cloudy Sky stencil. For this first panel, I will use Distress Oxide ink in the color Black Soot. I'm using purple tape to hold this stencil in place. And to add ink to this background, I will use a mini ink blending tool. Because this stencil is not long enough to cover the entire panel, I will do one half first and then move it down so I can completely cover this panel with clouds. And when I'm done, I will carefully remove the stencil and clean it up with a wet cloth. And now we can start working on a second panel. This time I'm using a watermark pad so I can later add perfect pearls on top. I chose two colors of perfect pearls for this panel. I'm going to start by applying the color pewter on one half of this panel, and then the color blue patina on the other half. Perfect pearls are pigment powders that have a lot of shimmer, which is absolutely beautiful in person. A little goes a long way with these powders, and I recommend you use a very soft, fluffy brush like a makeup blending brush. For some reason, that is not the type of brush that I am using today, and I feel like that is one of the reasons why the clouds don't look so perfect. But that's okay, and we will make it work. Once I'm done applying perfect pearls, I like to go back and forth with the brush to remove the excess powder. I also used a dry cloth to remove the excess powder off camera. I went back and forth a couple of times with the dry cloth, and I think that was another mistake. Instead, I think it is better if you just dab the cloth very gently a couple of times. So do as I say and not as I do, at least this time. And just to be safe, I will take this panel outside my craft room and spray this fixative all over it so it helps the perfect pearls to hold on to the cardstock. Off camera, I trimmed both of these panels down and adhere it to a slimline card base that measures 3.5 by 8.5 inches. To create a Halloween scene for this first card, I will be using this set by Honeybee Stamps. This is called the Names Check. Using heavyweight cardstock, I cut out lots of the ghost shapes so I can stack them for dimension. But before we do that, I will stamp the face of the ghost using Altenew Obsidian Black ink. This is a very rich black color which I love, and since it is a pigment ink, I will be able to add embossing powder and heat set it. Off camera, I also die cut some branches out of black cardstock using a branch die from this Sweet Birds on a Branch die set from Spellbinders. I cut lots of branches because I am planning on stacking them for dimension and also so I can add my hanging element on this branch. To cut out the grass, I used a grass border die by Honeybee Stamps, and I will add 2 layers of grass overlapping them a little bit. So each one of these branches on the card have about 4 die cut branches stacked up, and I am now working on my hanging element, which is gonna be a ghost. So after I have about 3 layers of die cut ghosts stacked up, I will add a very small piece of double-sided tape just to make it easier to hold the clear thread in place. Then I will add liquid adhesive and continue to add the other die cuts. In total, I think I stacked up 5 die cuts. And I repeated this same process to make a second ghost. Now I can go ahead and wrap the nylon thread around the branch and just test it out. Once I like the position and the length of this hanging element, I will add a few more branches just to hide the nylon thread. So my plan was to have one ghost hanging from each branch. However, I noticed that the stacked up branch at the bottom was getting in the way of the ghost hanging from the branch at the top. So I will carefully remove this stacked up branch at the bottom and only adhere one layer of the branch. Because of that, I will only have one element in this card that is hanging, but I think it's fine since this die cut ghost is actually pretty big. I also die cut some bats out of a black glitter cardstock, and I will add it to the background, being very careful not to add anything that will get in the way of the hanging ghost. And to finish it up, I will use my Nuvo Shimmer glitter pen just to add some sparkle to the ghost. And later I will add some of these die cuts to the inside of the card as well, just to tie everything together. And since I did not leave any room for a sentiment on the front panel, I will add it to the matching slimline envelope later. Let's now start working on the second slimline card. It will be very similar to the scene that we have on the first card, but instead of having a die cut ghost hanging from a branch, this time we will have a pumpkin. To stamp the faces on these pumpkin die cuts, I will place them inside my stamping tool using the negative space to help me to perfectly line them up. I'm using that same pigment ink so I can heat emboss it with clear embossing powder, just like I did with the ghosts. And now that I know that I cannot add any dimension around the hanging element, otherwise it will keep it from moving freely, I will only add one layer of the branch at the bottom. For the top branch, I will again stack up about 7 die cut branches, and I will also stack up the pumpkin die cuts and sandwich a piece of clear thread so I can wrap it around the branch to create the hanging element for this card. If I were to do this card all over again, I would stamp the face on both sides of the ghost and the pumpkin, just because when you play around with this card and shake it, the die cut element might land on the back side. Once I have my hanging pumpkin in place, I can go ahead and add all the die cut elements to create a Halloween scene, such as this cute little black cat and a few more bats. And I also decided to add another pumpkin on the ground. But the only die cuts in this card that are stacked up and has dimension are the branch on the top and the hanging pumpkin. Notice how I did not add any die cuts around the hanging pumpkin. That is so the pumpkin can freely move when you shake this card. To make slimline envelopes for these two cards that we created, I will use this slimline die set by Simon Says Stamp. To cut out the parts to make this slimline envelope, I used cardstock pages that measure 8.5 by 11 inches, which was too small. And that is why the bottom of this big piece looks uneven. But that is not going to be a problem because we do not need an envelope that is that big. So I will just use the card to decide how big I really want this envelope to be and trim off the excess that looks uneven. When you use this die set, it not only cuts the parts for you to make the envelope, but it also leaves engraved marks indicating where you should fold your paper. But since I had to trim off that section at the bottom, I will create another score line using my score pawl to guide the fold at the bottom. Now I can adhere the other pieces. Since I trim off this big piece, I will also have to trim off the other two smaller die cuts. To adhere the parts of the envelope, I am using strong liquid adhesive, but you could also use a double-sided tape if you prefer. And since I did not add any sentiment to the card, I will add it to the envelope. I will die cut the words Boo and Scare out of this very fun die plate by Fun Stamper's Journey. This is actually the die plate that I use just to cut out the bats that I added to the front panel of these cards. And here is one of my favorite card making tricks. Once I have all of my die cut pieces positioned exactly where I want them to go, I will use a piece of press and seal to pick up all of those pieces at once. Then I can just add liquid adhesive in the back and then place all of the pieces back where they were all at once. I let it dry for a few minutes before removing the press and seal. And remember that you can use that same piece of press and seal over and over again. So these were the two Halloween slimline cards that I wanted to share with you today. I had a lot of fun making these cards, and I hope it inspires you to go over all of the die plates that you already have and mix and match them to create new scenes for your cards. I appreciate you watching this video this far, and if you're interested, I will have in the description below links to my blog and Instagram where you can find more information and pictures. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel so you do not miss the next one. Thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful day, take care, and I hope to see you again soon.